that we also have in-person option, and we also have the Zoom technological option, which makes a big world into a small world. But what we want to do really is to try and connect to the Torah, which is our life, Kihem Chayenu, and is alive. It is constant. So it's our life, but it's also constant. It's alive itself. And the idea is to try and figure out a limud, a lesson that will help us in our personal life, day-to-day life, in this year, in this time, for our personal journey. And of course, we know we're at a stage in history that's never been before. We are getting ready for the final stage of Mashiach, and we're waiting for that to happen imminently. So everything about what we're doing is lining ourselves up to that. So if we're looking for a lesson in this week's Parshah, if we're looking for a reading, what the Torah has to tell us today, what we're learning from the Torah today, obviously somehow it has to bring us tools that will empower us to be that sort of person, switched on, living, and getting ready for.
Don't forget to.
We're going to mute all right there. If anyone wants to unmute anytime, you're more than welcome to. And we're going to be looking for tools that would help us, empower us to be able to be more switched on to what's really going on, not what it seems like is going on. So we're going to do our 3 steps, usual 3 steps. Step number 1, what's going on at this time of the year? What's in the Yiddish calendar? Step number 2, what's going on in the Parshah? And then step number 3, which is the bulk of what we're talking about, where is one area in the Parshah we put into our toolkit, put into our pocketbook, we can take it around wherever we are, and we have a tool for life. So what's going on this week's Parshah? What's going on this time of the year? This time of the year, we're actually celebrating. Many of my friends are right now en route, traveling home from spending a highly charged and very inspirational weekend in 770 in Crown Heights at the Kinus HaShluchim, the International Conference of Shluchim, Chavada emissaries from around the world. And this year, again, it was a hybrid option where those who couldn't make it, now it's the 1st of November and America's finally opened up, a day after the Kinus, but it didn't stop anyone from getting switched on. And that's the idea. It's a time of where not only a lot of people got together, not only a lot of communal people got together, but people who have dedicated their life to Yiddishkeit International, to Yiddishkeit around the world, gathered together with one goal. How can we better serve that vision? How can we better bring Yiddishkeit and make it available? And how can we make this world more ready for Mashiach? And that is special. That it was extremely special. Some fantastic highlights, some great Verbrennings were going on, or virtual and in person. And that obviously spills over to every single Yiddish community and every single person in general, wherever the person might be. So that's one big highlight. That screen is for you to see. As we're going to go through the class, you'll be able to see what's going on. You'll see what they see.
I also have a question, please.
The questions already? We're doing questions. Let's do questions. Please.
I pressed this morning on Kinnis HaShluchim. You want to be sent to this, and I was at a different Kinnis HaShluchim. This is the second one.
I'm not sure which one you ended up with first and which one you ended up second. But if it was inspirational to you, then use the inspiration. If it wasn't, go to something that's more inspirational, absolutely. But that is definitely
I don't know, log on online, anything.
You know how to live a Yiddish life. That's what counts. That's the real important thing. Logging on, logging off, logging in, logging out.
Do online laundry.
Online laundry.
As
long as you do online eating. Okay, online eating is getting a bit more tricky. Rosh Chodesh. We have a new month coming up. And every time there's a new month, it's a time for celebration.
What is Chodesh?
Chodesh is Thursday night, Friday, Be'ez Hashem, and we'll be starting the month of Kislev. It's a very special month because it has in it Hanukkah. It's important to announce to everybody in the whole world, Hanukkah this year is in November. I'm going to say it again. Hanukkah this year is in November. So those of us who are waiting for the end of December, you're going to miss it. You'll miss it if you blink too many times. We have to remind ourselves and the people around us, Hanukkah is around the corner. And the message of Hanukkah is also around the corner. You start living it today. But of course, the month of Kislev, which we're starting this Thursday night, Friday, is not just the month of Hanukkah. It's a very Hasidic month. It's full of highlights, one after the next, starting from the very first day of Kislev, which is Thursday night, Friday. Rosh Chodesh happens to be a major date on the Hasidic calendar, and that is in the year Tafshin Lamed Ches, 1977, the beginning of the Hebrew year, which was still towards the end of 1977. It was Simchas Torah, Shmini Atzeres, and the Rebbe suffered a tremendous heart attack in the middle of the dancing, and it was very touch and go, and there was all sorts of miracles that took place, and eventually on the first day of Kislev, the Rebbe was well enough to be able to leave his makeshift hospital room, which was his office, and be able to travel to go home around the corner. And it became such a simcha, such a joyous occasion. Every year since, there's a party on that day. I say a party, if I bring in. Oh boy, Rosh Chodesh Kislev is the Yom Tov of us of today, where we were gifted with all those years and all this innovation. How many shluchim went out since 1977? How many campaigns did the Rebbe start? And of course, that's a loud message for us. So many people, after they've had a setback, think, you know what, I got to pace myself. Maybe I should slow down. Maybe I should do a little less. Oh no. If Hashem has given me life, says the Rebbe, then that's a vote of confidence. It's Hashem telling us, I give you koyach to do even more. So as our children grow up, we think to ourselves, oh, finally I get a little breather. Oh no. Now that you've done that stage, you have the next level, and the next level up, and the next level up, almost like when our kids play games, especially the ones on the computer. So they finish level 1, and they get into a more difficult level, because now they have more skills. This guy tells us that's exactly what's going on. As we continue through the generations, where indeed it's circular, so history kind of repeats itself, but it's spiral. Spiral means every time we come round, we're on the next level up. It might look a little similar, but we're on the next level up because Hashem has given us more experience, more expertise.
Like DNA.
And that's what we need to do. We've got to keep on evolving. Very good. We've got to develop.
DNA spiral.
There we go. The DNA is the spiral. It happens to be that besides for being Kinnus HaShluchim and Rosh Chodesh Kislev, and it's the Yom Tov of the first day of Kislev, when the Rebbe became better, it also happens to be that in this Shabbos, that's another big highlight, and that is Beis Kislev is the Semi-Dida Notzach, when the Sfarim, the books in the library that were taken away, stolen, and were finally returned to 770 on Beis Kislev, which made it again another very important day. People of the book celebrate the books, people of the book learn the books, but also it had tremendous amount of difference. It made a big deal in our connection, where we associate ourselves not as free-falling, self-created whatevers. Our direct tradition and links link all the way back, and the library on the books and the messages that were part of the Friediger Rebbe's library, the previous Rebbe's library, all the way back through his father and his grandfather, all the way back to the Alter Rebbe and the Baal Shem Tov. That's the links, and those are the links that make the chain of which we are connected to. So the celebration of the books being released and redeemed from captivity, which was the expression used by the Rebbe, obviously could seem trivial, but it's so far from that. And of course, the message to us is that Hashem has faith in us, not only because of what we are, but because also of what we are connected to. That link in the chain that goes all the way back when, as strong as ever. So there's a lot going on this week. There's big highlights, but in our terms, there's major energy. So if we're feeling that we don't have energy, you might feel that way for a little bit. Just look around and see what's happening on the calendar and remind ourselves that the energy is here. The energy is with us. It's this time of the year that we have what it takes to make it happen. Okay, so it's this time of the year. Let's look at the Parshah and see what does the Parshah have included. And this week's Parshah is Parshas Toldos. And as we were saying before, Parshas Toldos, we put on the screen. Oops, this is the wrong slideshow. It happens before. Let's do this.
My son's birthday was Chayei Sarah.
Oh yeah?
He was born Chayei Sarah. So he just turned 25, Bezat Hashem.
Kenai Nahara. We're in Parshah Toldos though, because Chaya Sarah, I have two daughters. One is called Chaya, one is called Sarah, and the twins. It's great. So they say that, and the joke is that last week was Chaya Sarah, this week is Parshas Mushkaleh. But we're going to talk about Parshas Toldos, because this is the real Parshah. Parshas Toldos, we have the story of Yitzchak Avinu. Amazingly, Abraham filled Parshas Lech Lecha, Vayera, and Chaya Sarah. Three parshas loaded with stories about Avraham Avinu, and then next week we'll have a Yetzei, Vayishlach, Vayeshev, all about Yaakov Avinu, includes his sons. You want to include the sons, you go to Miketz, Vigash, and Vayechi. Yitzchak has maybe one parsha, a little bit of last week's parsha. Akeda, you say it's talking about him also, and this week's parsha. And even in this week's parsha, a lot of it's talking about his children. We know very little about Yitzchak Avinu. Not so much is told to us about him. And interestingly, it ties into his personality, where Avraham Avinu was Mr. Kindness, givingness, making tremendous noise and impact, and sharing with the world. Yitzchak was a very different style, very exacting, very sincere, and very calculated. And in that sense, he wasn't into making the major headlines, and his life was much more like just crack on with it. Do what you got to do, and do it all the way. And Yitzchak gives us an enormous amount of gevura, of strength, that was his gift to the future of Yiddishkeit. And the highlights of his life don't need that many parashas. And this week's parasha. We've got to notice what's going on in Yitzchak's life. So the first thing we read in the parasha is that Yitzchak Avinu is waiting 20 years for a child. Yitzchak and Rivka, at the end of 20 years, realized they better daven hard, and they are. The parasha opens up where Yitzchak and Rivka are davening for a child, and Hashem listens to the prayers, and she gets pregnant, and then something happens during the pregnancy that makes it harder and harder until the point where she's saying, is this really what I prayed for? Is this really what you got to imagine? She knew pregnancy is hard, and she wasn't the first woman to carry a child, but something was going much more than the norm, to the extent where she goes to find out from Hashem what's going on here. Rashi points out one of the ways to understand this is that she was walking past houses of goodness, of prayer, Yeshiva Shem Ever, of houses of study of Torah, of holiness, and she felt like the baby had an urge to try and be born already. She felt the kicking out, she wanted to get out. And she thought, oh, what a fantastic child, drawn already before birth to goodness. And then when she would walk past the other streets that went past houses of non-goodness, ungoodness, she felt a similar kind of urge, and that got her worried. What's going on here? What sort of child is this going to be? Going to make a mishmash and going to be an all over the place type child? She goes to ask, and Hashem tells her, Shnei goyim bevitnech, you're carrying twins. Not just any twins. These are twins that are going to change the landscape of history in the future. Oh boy. Now in hindsight, we see how correct this prophecy was, where we see how Yaakov and Esav fathered the future of the Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people, and Esav, which eventually become the grandfather of Edom, which became the nation of Rome. And the Gemara talks about when Rome rose, it was on the account of Jerusalem. And when Jerusalem was great, Rome was not. And almost like these two powerful forces were between each other, which one is going to prevail? And that's already in this week's parasha. Rivka, who is the rose amongst the thorns, who came out from a place where she was brought up in a depraved land. Her father, her brothers the whole environment, and yet she remained true and steadfast. And this is the mother Rivka, who has twin children. Esau is the elder, and Yaakov comes out clutching onto his heel, and therefore he has the name Yaakov. Yaakov is a simpleton or a sincere person who sits and studies all day, whereas Esau is out there hunting, and that's his favorite pastime. He's going to have a good time. And eventually one day he comes back, and it happens to be, it's his day where he's had a really, really busy day, not doing good things or doing not good things. He hadn't just been hunting animals, it'd been people also, and the Esau had turned a little left, a little outfield, and there he comes home, he's worn out, and it's exactly the same time where grandfather Avram passes away. Avram never saw how bad Esau was going to be, what sort of rough guy he was going to turn out to be. But at the same time, where their father was sitting Shiva, Yitzchak, was mourning the loss of Avram Avinu, Esau comes down from one of his whole new expeditions, and he's on a whole different level. And that's when the story plays itself out. Yaakov's making food for father Yitzchak, and it's a lentil soup. Lentils are round, and it's the idea of the cycle of life. And Esau's starving, and he says, Yaakov, shove some soup down my throat, please. He didn't say please, he did say please. And Yaakov's like, oh, I'd love to give you soup. Let's do a deal. You don't need your birthright. I'll give you the soup. You give me the birthright. And Esau's like, you know what? It's a deal, fine. I don't need no birthright. Gesundheit, you can have it. And they sign it, and the deal is done. And Esau forgoes the birthright, and Yaakov invites him in the soup. It was shortly after this time where famine hits the land of Canaan, where they were living. And just like his father did, Yitzchak does the same thing. He starts traveling down south to go and get himself food because he needs to be able to eat. And on his way down, he gets a message on the shortwave. He gets a message from Hashem. And Hashem says to him, do not leave the land of Eretz Yisrael, of Canaan.
Not to leave the land, yeah.
Why not? Oh, you're too holy. You are too holy, Yitzchak. Your father left the land. Your son will leave the land, but not you. You were brought up on the altar, as we read 2 weeks ago. No, you have to stay here in this holy land. And therefore, he doesn't go all the way to Egypt. He stays within the boundaries of Canaan. He ends up in Gerar, where the Pelishtim are, and he has such a similar story to his father, literally walking in the footsteps of his father, where the king was going to take away his wife, and then they may give him presents, and he has digging wells, and he has a whole sorts of foribbles with him, and the locals claim that the wells that he dug are theirs, and he has to dig a different well, and again he has a tzaras, and they have another fire disagreement. He does a third one, and finally gets a third well. You know what? This one, indeed, you dug. And they let him have the third one. But at this time, Esau is already gone off the rails. And he's married to women, Hittite women, who are so misbehaving, literally worshiping idols, idolatry in the house of Yitzchak. I mean, this was Avram's whole claim. Monotheism, we believe in one God. And here in his own house, he has 2 daughters-in-law that are literally worshiping idols. Amazingly, Esau stays at home. Yitzchak leaves him and keeps him close by. And he showers him with love. And Esau is never sent away. Esau had the din, had a status of like a family member, full-fledged family member, unlike Ishmael, who was the son of a maidservant. Esau is kept home. And if someone has to get sent away, who's going to get sent away? Yaakov. Esau, who's a child, part of the family, struggling, hard time keeping on the straight and narrow, stay close by. So much so that Yitzchak, the father of the family, has such tzaras. He goes blind from the smoke of the pagan idolatry. And he refuses to let Esau be sent away. And Esau stands nearby at any cost. This is education. This is the Gevura that Yitzchak teaches us. Sometimes we need to have insistence. If this is what needs to be done, whatever price it's going to be, even in his own health, even his own eyesight. And Yitzchak goes blind. And while he's blind, he realizes life's not forever. I need him to think about what the future holds. And he says to his son, his eldest son, Esau, I want to give you a blessing. I want to share my own blessing with my child so that the future can hold good. He says to him, go hunt me some game, bring me food so I can bless you. We learn three things right away. Number one, it's important to give brachas. We should bless one another. Number two, if you're hungry, go and eat. I think it's a good thing to tell men, boys, or when you don't tell them, just make it happen. Number three, if you're hungry, go eat. But if you want to give a bracha, make sure you're in state of mind where you're not hungry or grumpy or in a bad mood, because brachas and sadness don't go together. The time where you're able to give a good bracha is when you're in a good mood. And that's why we hear Duchen and Birchas Kohanim. The Kohanim give their brachas, their blessings to the congregation in a time of joy, Yom Tov. That's why outside of Israel, we don't hear Birchas Kohanim from the Kohanim every day, not even every Shabbos, only when it's a special happy occasion, because brachas flow when it's a happy occasion. So Yitzchak says to his son Esau, go bring me food, I'll be satisfied, I'll be in a good mood, and I'll give you a good bracha. And of course, this is where the story takes a whole new twist. Rivka Imenu realizes Yitzchak wants to give his son a bracha. He wants to shower him with blessings so that he should be empowered to come back onto the straight and narrow, and he wants to uplift him. But the mother's intuition, Rivka understands the best way to help Esau is not to dump more blessing upon him, is to give him better support. And support him not by dumping unlimited amount of blessing on him, but to support his support team. And therefore she calls him Yaakov. She says, Yaakov, up until now you had one responsibility, and your brother Esau had a different responsibility. Esau is not living up to his responsibility. You must step up to the plate and take both responsibilities. Responsibility doesn't mean you have to do it yourself. You must make sure it gets done. Go in and take the brachas that are allocated for Esau's neshama and take that birthright that you've taken already. But that birthright comes with the responsibility. Go take those brachas and make sure that you support, be a light unto the nations, and support not just your Jewish cause, but be the cause that will be the game changer for the entire humanity. How are you going to do that? You're going to masquerade as if you are Esau. And you're going to have to carry the responsibility of Esau as well. And Yaakov's like, me? How can I do something that's so out of my depth? It's so far away from me. I'm going to end up cursed. Says Rivka, no. Any curse will be on me. You must. It's the future. This is how it has to be. And Yaakov does exactly that. He gets dressed up, make as if he's Esau, goes in and tells his father that he has come and he's the firstborn. He is the Esau. He's taking the brachas, and Esau's brachas is going to come to him. And he serves his father fantastic food that his mother ate, his mother prepared. And Yitzchak is full of joy, gives him the most beautiful, gorgeous, fantastical brachas that we repeat every Friday, Motzei Shabbos, every week. V'yiten lecha lekim, such beautiful brachas. As Yaakov is leaving through the door, who comes in from the other side? Esau. Esau is there. The light switch is on the outside if you need. Okay? Good. And Esau walks in and says, hey, father, I brought you some food. have a good fresh and give me some brachas. And in 1 second, Yitzchak realizes what just happened. He says to Esav, your brother's outsmarting you. Oh, the other one. Okay, we'll get it in a second. Even on is fine, we'll sort it.
What's going on?
Let's go, don't worry. Yep, this is just a special moments. There we go. Sorted. Okay. So we have Esav starts crying. He says, Father, you have no other brachas. There's only one bracha. You must bless me with something. And Yitzchak says, dear son, I've given your brother the most fantastic brachas. However, there's one angle. And that is that when your brother is not worthy of bracha, not worthy of the blessings, then you will step up. And at that point, you will be able to overcome him. And this is when he tells him the famous line, Hakol kol Yaakov, Esav. He said actually to Yaakov, but he says the voice and the power of prayer, power of the mouth will be in the hands of Yaakov, and the power of strength of the sword will be to Esav. And the story doesn't end there. At this point, Yaakov gets what he gets, Esav gets what he gets, and Esav is fuming. And when Esav is angry, it's not a good idea to hang around, because Esav is capable of doing all sorts of not good things. And therefore, their mother, Rivka, says to her husband, Yitzchak, it's not a good idea to have Yaakov hang around for too long around there. Let's send him off to find a wife. Where should he find a wife? Not local girls. Let him go back to the tribe where your father sent his messenger to pick up a wife for you, which was her. From far away Padan Aram, let Yaakov go and travel out there, spend time with my family, and there he'll find the wife. And that's when he gets sent away. He's going to travel all the way the miles and miles to Uncle Lavan and spend time there. The Parshah finishes off with the family tree, not of Yaakov, but of Esav. In the few short lines, quite a few lines, we have all the family of Esav, who was born, who was the king, etc. And we have at the end of the Parsha that Esav actually marries and takes another woman who is from the family of Avraham Avinu, Yishmael's daughter, and he marries Machlas and added one more wife to his family. Again, not a very good choice, but at least it was part of the family and it made it look good. That's how the parsha ends. This is such a loaded parsha. So many questions to explore, so many different points to learn from, but we're going to pick one area. We're going to pick an area that I don't think we've ever discussed, at least not in this series of Shurim yet, but it's a topic that is related to Eretz Yisrael, land of Eretz Yisrael. This holy land is your land. The uniqueness of Eretz Yisrael and our special right to it. How does it show up in this week's parsha? Because Yitzchak, who's the middle of three forefathers, he's not the first, he's not Abraham, he's not Yaakov the last, he's in the middle. And he was the one who was too holy to leave the Holy Land. And he's told to stay right here. And we want to talk about what was so special about this strip of land. What was so special that Yitzchak had to stay there? And until today, that question still rings. Why do we have so much time and so much energy for this land of Eretz Yisrael, for many of us who have never been there? And for some of us, even when we were there, it's not because we were there that makes it special. What is it about Eretz Yisrael that makes it so special? And the truth is, this question isn't just asked by us. This question is asked by many people who look at the Jewish people and ask, why are they so crazy about this land? Sometimes it's not just a query, it's a complaint. What makes Israel Jewish? What makes that little piece of land connected to somebody who grew up in the United Kingdom and has maybe 4 grandparents that were born here also? Why do you feel close to and connected to a land which is out in the Middle East, in a rough neighborhood where the neighbors are all warring? And what do you want from them? And why are you making yourself and the world crazy that you have to be connected? And it gets stronger than that. And what we want to talk about is, what is our claim to it? And why do we insist on having a connection to Eretz Yisrael? And of course, the lesson we need to learn is not only about the macro, the big Eretz Yisrael, the land out there in the Middle East. We're going to use it as a metaphor as well. We all have a little piece of land inside of us, which is the Israel, the Holy Land. And we have to remain and retain that connection. We have to remain connected to it at all costs. We have to make sure that it's at the forefront, at the center stage. And the question is why or how. We're going to explore that by understanding better what is our connection to Eretz Yisrael. Now, for those of us who are doing the JLI course, which we're doing now, Outsmarting Anti-Semitism, this coming Wednesday, we're going to be exploring this topic as well, slightly more elaborated, I should say, but I think it's a great piece, and it's a special sign of bracha when this week's Parshah, this week's reading actually lines up with our other type of study. But let's talk about, starting off, not so much with the Parshah, let's start off with what the general understanding of why Israel belongs to the Jews. Hashem, great answer. The most common answer that is given.
Homeland.
A homeland, a good word, but the question is, why? How did Israel become our homeland? Especially to a Polish Jew.
Biblically, and also it was somewhere to escape from the pogroms, and people felt that they would be safer there. They could build their own new country. That's what Israel is, a new country.
New country, safety. Great answer. I'm getting chats. I'm going to struggle to keep the chats in. Promised land, inheritance. We like that. Yes, those are good answers. And we're going to say that actually there are very good answers. And even those who hate those answers, who do whatever they can to try and counter-argue these answers, they'll have to, when nobody's looking, understand and agree that actually there's truth to these answers. We're going to put on the screen 3 general, most common answers that are given. Number 1 answer, this is actually in the Declaration of Independence, it's in the Hatikvah as well. But the idea is that this was given to, maybe not in the Hatikvah, but it's in the Declaration of Independence of Israel, that the world legal system has not only okay, but voted in that Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people. Background of the story is Ottoman Empire, First World War, falls apart, Balfour Declaration, British mandate, the League of Nations gives Britain the job of dividing the land to make a suggestion of partition plan. And in 1948, Israel accepts that partition plan, and it's voted in the League of Nations, which is the United Nations equivalent today, and Israel is born as a state legally with claims to this portion of the land. So you could say whatever you want, but it's the legal rights that this nation has to this strip of land. Argument number 1. Number 2, also very common, it's also in there, and that is we need to be able to protect ourselves. We can rely on nobody. And history has proven that. Even our allies who are not going to throw bombs at us, not going to kill us, but at a moment of need, will they bomb the train lines when their fighter bombers are looking for targets anyhow? And they're flying over Nazi Germany. Will the Allies bomb those tracks and slow down the killing machine of the concentration camps? And history has the answer. The answer was no. The answer was no. It's not a matter of debate. That's what happened. That's what happened. We need to be able to step up for ourselves. When the ships carrying Jewish refugees tries to dock in the United States of America and Canada and are sent back to Europe, because the answer was no. Israel needs to be able to protect itself. We need to have our own country. That's another very tremendous argument. And then the third argument, which is also very strong, is the historical connection. The amount of history that the Jewish people have in that land. But guess what? Unbroken connection. There has never been a time where there was no Jewish people in the land of Israel from all the way back when. From even before David HaMelech, from times of Yeshua, all the way through, correct. And we have tremendous archaeological evidence to back all this up. Fascinating. For more than 3,000 years, the Jewish people have been connected to this land. And it happens to be it's the only nation that ever had Jerusalem as its capital. Ever. Fascinating. There's never been competition to this. Even till today. But of course, these three arguments aren't necessarily based on Torah. They're true arguments. And as you can imagine, just because I put this on the screen, I want to say this very clear. We're not suggesting that these counter arguments have validity, but they are out there. And unfortunately, even amongst Jewish people. There is the first counter argument to the legal claim. Who gives the United Nations claims to be able to take land from one place and give it to someone else? Colonial activity. Today, in this new moral compass, however warped it is, colonial activity is not okay, and therefore the United Nations claim, which is based on the fact that they can do whatever they want with real estate, is a non-starter, unfortunately, even for Jewish people who are on the counter-argument side. And similarly, the idea of having the land to protect ourselves, well, the counter-argument to that is twofold. Number one is pick a different place. Why do you have to come to such a volatile place where there are other counter voices that want to have, go to Uganda, go to somewhere else and set up a safety spot somewhere else? Why does it have to be the land of Israel? And then there's the even more sophisticated counter argument, which is when you gather all together in one place, it's even more dangerous. And their argument, which has some sort of understanding to it, think about the lead up to the 6-Day War in 1967. What was the world worried about? What were we worried about?
My sister's bat mitzvah that time, in 67.
Yeah.
She was bat mitzvah and she asked for Jerusalem for bat mitzvah present. And she got it.
There you go. But that was the story after the 60 War. Pre-60 War, the fear was that because all the Jews, it was 3 million Jews, were concentrated in one place, they are just a sitting target. And unfortunately, the scare was that it should make it much easier. Think of Iran, chas v'shalom. And that threat is a very serious threat. And that's part of the counter-argument. Perhaps it's not safe for everyone to be in one place. And then, of course, the third counter-argument is, well, you say that history, well, the Dutch don't have a right to take New York back because it belonged to the Dutch. That's history. You have one nation, and they had a land, and then they lose it, and it moves on. That's how the world runs. Because you used to be there, it doesn't mean you can stay there. You know, the kids fight and they say, I was there first. Okay, you were there first, and now somebody else is it. So that's how it runs. So the fact that we have a historic connection, does that mean we have a right to the land forever? And of course, these counter arguments are weak. And there's much more truth to the arguments than to the counter arguments. However, we need to know that our claim to Eretz Yisrael, to land of Israel, runs much deeper than all of this. And of course, these claims are great and are important, but only as an add-on. We have to remember that the reason why we want Eretz Yisrael and we care about Eretz Yisrael is much deeper than that. And the answer is going to be, someone said it here, the answer is because Hashem wants us to have it. Or put it in more firmer terms, Hashem needs us to retain our connection to Israel. That's how he designed the world. And he needs us to hold on to it, yes. And not only because he likes us to have it, and he doesn't mind if we has it, he needs us to have it. That is part of the master plan. And we're going to see that actually in this week's Parshah, we see a similar kind of idea. Yitzchak wants to leave, and Hashem tells Yitzchak, Doesn't say you don't have to leave. He says, don't leave. Stay here. Gor ba'aretz hazois. You need to stay here. You need to remain connected to this land. And Yitzchak, in a sense, was like a taster of what we are today. We need to retain a connection to Israel. We need to keep it safe, and it will keep us safe. So let's do a little bit of how we find in the Parsha. It's a little bit of a question and an answer, just to help us get through it. And the idea is going to be that we understand and appreciate why Israel must be Jewish and why Jewish people need to have Israel. We'll then understand, for the same price, every single one of us must retain that obvious and strong connection to our spark, is Israel's spark inside of us, and not let it go at any cost. Here goes. Let's do a few psukim. This is the passage that describes Yitzchak not coming down. I know, no one. Thank you very much. Thank you for the offer. God appeared to him, to Isaac, and said, do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land that I will tell you. Gor ba'aretz hazois ve'imcha. Sojourn in this land, I will be with you, and I will bless you. For to you and to your seed I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abram your father. Do not go down to Egypt. Isaac in the mind gone down, says Rashi, as his father had gone down in the days of the famine of his father's days. And God said to him, do not go down to Egypt. You are as a perfect burnt offering, and being outside the Holy Land is not fitting for you. And therefore, although your father went down in the days of his famine, you cannot do the same. Do not go down to Egypt, to Rashi. So here we have it. Hashem tells to Yitzchak, do not go down. I'm giving you this land like I've sworn to your father. What was the oath that Hashem had taken to give to Avraham? So let's read it here on the page. Kars Hashem is Avraham bris lamer. On that day, God formed a covenant with Abram, saying, to your seed, I have given this land. From the river of Egypt until the great river, the Euphrates River. And we just point this out, the Medrash says this, it doesn't say I gave, it says I have given. What's the difference?
Past progressive.
Past progressive, great word, but yes, but the important, the message.
Continuous break.
Not only it continues, it's already begun. I have given means that not I will give sometime in the future, but it's already happening. And this is the Medrash. God's spoken word is considered like deed. As the verse states, to your seed, I have given this land. It does not say, I will give this land, but I have given this land. And therefore, halachically, the land of Israel, on some level, already belonged to the people, the Jewish people, before they were born. Could you imagine that? Yitzchak hadn't been born yet at the time of this covenant, let alone Israel and Yisrael and Yaakov and the tribes and Moshe. But Hashem had already given the land to his children. Just a quick one. It actually has halachic ramifications. In the story of the inheritors of the land of Israel, famously there was one fellow who was put to death. He passed away. He was killed before he made it to Israel. Yet he owned a portion of the land. Where did we find that? Because his daughters brought up the case before Moshe, saying, what's going to be with our father's part of Israel? Your father's part of Israel? We haven't got there yet. How does he have a part of Israel if he's not even alive and we're not there yet? Of course, the daughters of Tzlach come to Moshe and say, what's going to be with our father's portion of land? And Hashem says, yes, they're right. He does own a portion of the land. How does he own a portion of the land? Because ownership was transferred to Avraham and his descendants way back when. Even before they conquered the land, they had a level of ownership over that land. Fascinating. And that's why the daughters of Tzlach, it belonged to them already. And they were asking what's going to be with our piece of land. And they managed to secure it. One more time.
Was it at the covenant between the pieces?
Correct. Between the parts, the bris ben absurd. Yes. However, having said that, it's important to note that even Avraham Avinu, Hashem says to him, I have given it to you. But there's also an element where he says to him, I will give it to you. And there's both. Although on one level it already belonged to Avraham Avinu, it wasn't complete. And it only came fully belonging to the Jewish people when they actually went in there and conquered it. The Rambam writes the following: whenever Eretz Yisrael is mentioned, the intent is the land conquered by the king of Israel or a prophet with the consent of the entire Jewish people. This is called the conquest of the community, kibush rabin. If, however, an individual Jew, a family or a tribe, goes and conquers a place for themselves, even in the land given to Abraham, it is not considered as Eretz Yisrael in the sense that one is obligated to observe all the mitzvahs there. It does not become Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. The holiness of the land does not fully apply to the real estate. It does not connect to the actual pieces, parcels of land, unless it's fully conquered in the halachic sense. So, what we have here is that the gifting of Israel to the Jew has two stages. Two things occurred when the land was given to the Jewish people. A, monetary element, ownership of the land. And B, sanctity of the land. And they are not synonymous. They are both true, but they happen on two different stages. The first element, Jewish ownership of the land, was achieved by God giving the land of Israel to Avraham Avinu, our patriarch Abraham, and that was true even before they arrived in that part of the world. And number two, the second element, the land of Israel's sanctity, especially the special mitzvahs that apply only in Israel, first occurred when the Jewish people entered the land. They had to actually get there and conquer the land, and only then did the sanctity actually connect fully to those parcels of land. Two levels or two steps, and they came about in two stages. So here we have it. The mitzvah of Israel only took place after it was conquered, which is when the Jews assumed legal control over the land. And that's when the mitzvahs, the sanctity, applied. What we have interesting is that we had a claim to the monetary, our ownership of the land, even before we owned it, and before we conquered it. Once we assumed legal control of it, and we actually controlled it, that's when the Kedusha came into it. And of course, this is going to be the question. Here we've got the two steps. Giving the land to Abraham, ownership land, conquering land much later, 440 years later, the sanctity land comes across. The question arises, considering the view in the Medrash and Halacha that God's words conferred ownership of the land to Abraham, to his descendants after him, why can't we say that they confirmed sanctity as well? In which case, the laws pertaining to the land should have gone into effect. The question is, why did it have to be separated? Why is it in two separate stages? If the land belongs to us already before we get there, why isn't it holy? What's missing? If we own it, what are we going to add when we get there? And this is going to be a key element of understanding why Israel must be Jewish. Actually, why all the nations of the world should be championing and encouraging the Jews to retain every bit and every inch of Israel when we appreciate why it's necessary. You know, we could ask the question, why does a faith need to have real estate? Are we any less Jewish in England than in Jerusalem?
Yeah, I don't do as many mitzvahs.
Okay, but are we less Jewish?
No.
No. So when Hashem is deciding how he's going to set up the faith, why does he come up with the idea of having a particular place to be Jewish? Think about it. Nowadays, it makes so much sense. Of course, the best place to be is to be in Israel. How did it happen? Why are we more human or more Jewish or more anything in one place more than in another place? There are other faiths that have a center, a headquarters, but is that headquarters somehow connected to a particular place? Why does it have to be that way? What was God thinking, if you like? Why did he make such a hard ship? Part of Yiddishkeit. We don't need a real part of real estate. We're Jewish wherever you are, and you're good to go. We could do whatever we want. Especially today, we see how much has been accomplished around the diaspora outside of Israel. It's true there are mitzvahs that are limited by the land, but that's exactly the question. Why? And there's a very good answer. There's a very, very good answer. And the way we're going to get to the answer is to understand the difference between when Avraham was in Israel to when his grandchildren made it to Israel.
It wasn't Matan Torah, and then there was Matan.
Boom! There we go. The difference is that when we went into Israel, we were already post-Sinai. What changed at Sinai? What changed at the giving of the Torah? Holy cow. Holy cow. I don't know where the quote comes from. Maybe I should be careful before I say that. But you could have leather that is a piece of cow and it's holy. And it's a Jewish concept. Or you could have a thing, stuff, material that is holy. Because it doesn't really make sense. How does something as coarse as leather become holy? You kiss the piece of leather. You make sure it doesn't fall on the floor. The ideals are very sacred. The concepts, the thought process are sacred. But the things are sacred, that is Sinai. That is Matan Torah. And it's not just one more detail. It's what it's all about. It's what it's all about. Why do we have 613 mitzvahs? Because each one of those mitzvahs are going to help us transform the world, cleanse the world. Not just cleanse the world, bring out, extrapolate what the world's already all about. We're going to switch on the light in every materialistic part of the world. And that's why we need to do mitzvahs that engage material world. That's why we need to have candles in order to light Shabbos candles. You can't light candles without candles. That's just the way it is. And you cannot have kosher food unless you have food. Is that true? You're not going to have no kosher food unless you have food. That's how it works. All about Yiddishkeit, you got to have things. You got to have stuff. You got to be involved. You got to be doing business in order to do business kosher. You cannot have good Jewish education for your children unless you're having children. You cannot have honor your parents unless there's a child and a parent. You got to have family. You got to have comforts. You got to have a home in order to put a mezuzah on your door. And if you have two doors, then you have a bigger house and you have two mezuzahs and a bigger house. That's how it works. Yiddishkeit revolves around a real world, a world of material. And that's exactly why we need a place, a geographical area that is going to become not just a place that we do mitzvahs, but the land is going to become a holy land. And when God gifted us the land of Israel, he didn't just give us, oh, you know what, guys? I've got a really nice gift for you. Here, become wealthy. Have a place that everyone else would love to have, and it's going to be yours. Oh, no. Much more than that. I have a place. You've got to get there, and you've got to make it holy. And only you will be able to make it holy. I've given you the gift. You have the ownership for it. It's yours. It doesn't have the sanctity yet. Get there. Work the place. Make it a holy land, and you've transformed not just stuff, but also the space of the Holy Land of Israel is going to become a place of holiness. If you have to use English words only, no Hebrew, how can you translate the word holiness? Help me out.
Separate.
Sacred, okay.
Separate.
Separate. Oh, separate. Thank you, separate. I'm sorry, I missed that. Yes, separate. We've got a chat here. Birthplace, okay. I'm looking for translation of the word holy. Whatever you use. One more time.
To believe, a belief.
So if a Sefer Torah is holy, then it's a believable item. I'm looking for something, sanctified is a good word. I'm looking for words that help us. I'm going to use the word godly. Probably not a correct, perfect translation, but it works. The more godly something is, the more we call it holy. Holy is not abstract. Holy is not just because it's spiritual. Holy means it represents and it screams out and it tells us Hashem. And the more holy an item is, the more it just says Hashem, Hashem, Hashem. And when you have a piece of land that tells us Hashem, that's a holy piece of land. And the reason why Hashem wanted us to have Eretz Yisrael, to have a land of Israel, is because we need to make this world have an area that not just allows us to do mitzvahs, but has actually become a holy place. I want to end off with a fascinating insight that the Rebbe uses this to help us understand. What we're learning here is that the reason why we claim Israel as ours is because it's holiness. And our job is to make holiness, and therefore we need to retain an active connection, control over the place that we can make holy, because this is the place where Hashem created heaven and earth for. This is the calling for which God created all of the 7 billion people plus that exist today, is in order that Israel should be a holy land. Holy land means godly. And the Rebbe has a fascinating insight. The very first Rashi in the entire Torah, by the way, Rashi lived 1,000 years ago. He lived at the time of the Crusades. And unfortunately, it was a very scary time for the Jewish people, and certainly people who lived in Israel. It was a war between the Christians and the Muslims. Nobody dreamt that the Jews are going to conquer the land anytime soon, and they didn't. But at that time, Rashi, in his first opening commentary in the Torah, tells us that there'll be a time, many times, where the Jews will have control over Israel, and the nations will turn around and say, you control Israel? Rob us! Why do you rob the land from others? And to think that Rashi at that time, this is what he wanted to write. And of course, Rashi, as a prophet, wrote this with Ruach HaKodesh. And how true is it today? We're called thieves, robbers. And the Rebbe asked the question, why are we called robbers? Every country in the world was once owned by somebody else. And that's what war does. It changes ownership. So why should the Jews be called robbers? Because they own the land today? And the answer is, we're not called robbers because we own the land. We're called robbers and we're accused of robbing the land because we claim, and it rings true, that whether or not we are in active control of the land of Israel, it's still Jewish. We have a connection to the land whether or not we are there, because the holiness of the land of Israel is there already. And that's what we've robbed. It's almost like we've pinched that piece of land out of the game. They're playing Monopoly. Who owns this piece of real estate? Who owns that piece? And it's coming and it's going. But Israel's just not in the game. It's become a holy land. And since then, it's Jewish, whether or not we have control over it. It's a place that even if we're not there, we face there, we talk about it, we yearn for it, and we can't wait to get back to our homeland. That's what the claim is. You've stolen the land, not because you own it, because you turned it into something else. You've taken it out of the game. And you know what the message is? That the same exact is true for you and me. The Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, says, you know what? Today, you're not going to be doing the right thing. You're not going to be able to shake off anxiety or worry or sadness. No way. And we say to ourselves, I could have behaved the worst possible way. It doesn't change who I am. I am a piece of holiness. Even when I'm not there, that's still who I am. Even if I'm not there, even if we're not in the land of Israel, the holiness is something that Hashem gave us the power to transform and turn a piece of real estate into holiness, and certainly a piece of me into holiness. And this is what we have to remember. The land of Israel, our claim to land of Israel, is much more than legal rights of the United Nations, much more than just security of the body, much more than just historical fact. It's a godly given responsibility that we must make a piece of real estate in this world into holiness, and we do. And the same way that Hashem wants us a piece of the world, Hashem wants us also to have a piece of me that is the center stage of everything that I live for that is fully and completely holy. And I have to remind myself that even when I'm not there, this is who I am. Are we ready for Mashiach? Are we ready to live a Mashiach life? Let's make it happen. Hashem should bench every single one of us with an uplifted week, an uplifted Chodesh, but more importantly, with the confidence to walk with our head held high in the face of anti-Semites, anti-Israelites, or whatever you want to call it, in the face of our own personal worries and our own personal sadnesses that try and bring us down. And we're going to say, this is who we are. You can like it or lump it. This is what I'm going to be. I'm on fire, I'm encouraged, and I'm fully confident Hashem is on our side. Thank you for joining. Thank you. I wish everyone a gesund Tevach, a gebench Tevach. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please ask. And same time, same place next week.
Can I just say one thing? David Ben-Gurion said, in Israel, to be a realist, you have to believe in miracles. Very good.
David Ben-Gurion, take it from him.
Yeah.
Wow. Amazing. Thank you. That was great.
And you, fantastic share, as always. See you
Thank
Wednesday.
very much. Thank you,
Thank you.
Sylvia.
Bye-bye.
Yes, good comment. Call Tov.
Thank you very much. Does it say somewhere that everybody owns a tiny piece of Israel?
It certainly does. Absolutely. Every Yid has a portion in Eretz Yisrael, but also every person has a piece of Israel inside of them. Yeah, that's the Shem. Okay, we learned something. Thank you for joining.
See you Wednesday, God willing.
Yes, please God. Thank you. Take care.